Welcome back to the table. Today, Ryan and I are taking a look at Dead Cells. Yes, this is the board game tabletop version of the popular PC, well, I guess, and video game. And I'm here to tell you, if you've ever played Dead Cells and you thought, whoa, that is a punishing game, I think they've captured that, at least in our limited experience with playing this one. And this is just a prototype with just a little bit of the content. But we can tell you right away, you're not going to roll through this entire game without dying.
Well, yeah, that's kind of the whole point of the genre. If you're not familiar with Dead Cells, it's what they call like a Rogue-Lite, which is a game where you're trying to push the game to see how far can you go. How far can you go before you die? As you go through the game, you're collecting things. You're collecting cells. You're collecting these golden teeth. And these are things that you're keeping with you kind of to purchase items and upgrades in between what they call runs. That are going to improve your character. So the second time you play this game, you're going to be a little bit stronger. You're going to get a little farther. You're going to be moving through multiple maps. You're going to be fighting different bosses. You're going to be collecting new items and things like that, and just having an easier time progressing. But what's very unique, and I think this might be one of the first times I've seen this game it's open-ended, and it's designed to just be continually replayed. Every time you come back to the table, you start from wherever you left off last time. Even if you have a different group, it's not like it's a campaign game or anything. That's a very interesting promise for a game. Yeah,
it does sort of evolve, and as far as we know, it would just continually evolve because you can just keep running and running and running, and the game state kind of evolves with you. You're going to maybe start with some abilities, some things that give you, now you have equipment at the beginning of the run, which you don't have at the beginning of the very first time you play this. And like Dead Cells, you're going to be running through these biomes, and you start in the prisoner's quarters and then hopefully progress. And as you do so, you're going to be navigating through here and picking a route at the end, going to another biome, potentially going to a boss fight. And that's about as far as we've got, because in the prototype we have here, we have the prisoner's quarters, we have the toxic sewers, and then we had the concierge, which was the first boss.
The first main boss. And some of these locations and some of these paths are actually kind of locked, even just like the board game, or like the video game. So you're going to be trying to find your way through these different branching paths to get where you want to go. And yet ultimately, some of these levels are going to lead to a specific boss. Some of them might lead to a different boss or other different biomes. And you're going to kind of have to remember that as you're playing through this, giant branching map.
And as you play through, it is important to tell you, this is a cooperative game. You're going to be able to play this up to 4 players, and each player is going to represent one of those headless, I think they're called in the game.
If you remember the game, kind of what you play, but there's 4 different versions of that character.
Now, the 4 different versions in this game start a little bit differently. You're all going to start with one of these player boards, and the player boards have these sort of progression tracks for these different categories. You've got survival, brutality, and tactics. And as you move up these throughout the game, you're going to get the chance to potentially go up on these. They're going to unlock initial abilities, temporary abilities that you'll have at least for the rest of that run, because all of those things are going to get reset at the end of a run, and that's if any one player dies. But these characters give you a little bit of different flavor, but that is really just scratching the surface, because you're going to get more and more things throughout the game that maybe give you a little bit more flavor, even more cards in your deck.
Yeah, everybody starts with their own deck, and they do a variety of different things when it comes to combat, of course, because there is, this is an action-style game. There's some combat that's happening. This is one aspect of the game that can be improved upon even as you kind of level up your characters through mutations, which is something you can kind of earn throughout the course of the game as rewards. As you gain those, some of those cards are just going to go into your deck and make your deck better, allow you to kind of focus your deck into doing some specific things. Because when we talk about combat, it's not necessarily just about doing damage. You can be inflicting status effects. You can be trying to heal and protect other players.
Looting opportunistically.
There's a lot of different avenues in which you can kind of build your deck to excel. And you're going to be doing that over the course of several runs.
Yeah, your first run, you're not going to get... In fact, I would be shocked if anyone got to the boss in the first run. We got past the prisoner's quarters, but in the toxic sewers, we met our first demise.
We had like 1 health left.
Yeah, we had taken some battering, and that's the way the game is designed. You're going to have a fight, and you're going to see, we're not going to survive this fight. Or we're not going to kill all of these enemies in this fight. So you're going to see some of that play out. And the fighting is very puzzly. But before the fighting begins, like I said, you're going to be making your way through the biome. So this biome here, you start here, this is the prisoner's quarters, And as you do this, you're simply going to, as a group, decide what path you want to go. In this first one, you'd go here. You simply just flip over the token and resolve it. This token is going to give us something. This one gives us going up on the green track. So one player is going to be able to go up on the green track. And that, again, something that you decide as a group because it really kind of emphasizes the cooperation. Then you're going to move on to the next space. And these spaces can be a number of things. These next two spaces are both enemies. But before you do that, you're going to want to look at those routes because some of the routes are going to give you access to certain tiles that you wouldn't get the other way. There may be some checks along the way. There may be some routes that require you to have a rune like this one here. Unless you have that rune, which are up here, you're not going to be able to take that route at the end of the biome.
Which I'll point out, you don't even know how to earn these runes. You've got to find access to these runes, and then on a future run, you'll go, oh, we have that rune. We got that rune last game. Now we can try a different level. And it's really unique that the way that these runes all work.
Yeah, but when you do face off against one of these enemies, that's what takes you to sort of the other meat and potatoes portion of this game, and that is the combat, which is down at the bottom of the board.
Yeah, and each one of these tiles is going to tell you which enemies you fight. Not specifically, but you're going to be fighting regular enemies or elite enemies. And each one of these is also going to give you some kind of loot. This loot is going to come in the form of cells, which you can then trade in for those mutations in between runs, try to level up your characters a little bit. They're going to come in the form of those golden teeth, which you can sell back to merchants, and they might come in the form of blueprints. Every one of these biomes has a specific deck of blueprint cards, and once you unlock one of these blueprints, it's with you for the rest of the game. All throughout your runs, these blueprints are going to get shuffled into the item deck, allowing you still have to find the items, but you'll have access to better and better items based on how far you've managed to get through the entire game.
Yeah, and you actually have to get through at least one biome to grab these things because as you reveal them, they're going to go right here. And if you get through a full biome, you're going to have an inter-biome portion of the game, which is where you go to this and you're able to interact with these people, but you're also able to pick up those blueprints. But the biggest challenge getting through one of those biomes, like I said, is fighting. And that combat, like we were starting to say, it's going to bring some number of enemies down here to the combat board, and the combat works in a very interesting way.
Yeah, you'll notice on each one of these cards, it's going to sit in these specific locations as they're drawn. And each one of these characters is going to have a 1, 2, and a 3. These are for the 3 rounds of combat, and there are really only 3 rounds of combat. There's some 0 stuff that might trigger and some 4 stuff. But really, you have 3 primary rounds of combat. And this line across the board is literally just going to tell you how to resolve these. You're going to resolve whatever's here in the first line, you're going to resolve whatever's on the player's lines, and then you're going to resolve whatever's on the enemy's lines, and then you'll do some upkeep. So it even shows you what upkeep to do after each round. Player cards actually look very similar to these enemy cards in that you're also going to have these lines. But the trick here is that this is cooperative. You're all playing these cards out to determine your first, second, and third lines, but you're not really getting a chance to communicate too much. This is kind of supposed to represent that real-time chaos of everyone doing their own attacks. So you can't always, set up perfect synergies, but you can try.
Yeah, it is cooperative, but like Ryan just said, you can't just say, okay, here's my hand of cards, everyone. What should we do? You're looking at your hand of cards. You're looking at what you can do in round 1, round 2, round 3, on 3 cards, which is your typical hand. You're going to choose one of those cards to play, and when it's in your turn in turn order, you can place that card face down and say one thing. You can say, in round 2, I'm going to loot. Or in round 1, I'm going to do some damage. So you can describe one line very generally as you place your cards. So it gives the people around the table a little bit more information like, oh, you're going to loot? There's only one piece of loot to pick up, so I'm not going to play a card that has loot necessarily.
Right, and the timing of all that is very, very important because you have a variety of effects, like we said, a variety of status effects that can be placed on those enemies, and they can place status effects on you or even themselves. Like, for example, this guy gets a shield. So if you do the 2 damage right away, he dies before he ever gets to put that shield. But if you do 1 damage, let him take his action and do 1 damage the next round, the shield blocks the damage, and you might not get to kill that character because of the way that these things are timed out. So you really need to look at what their abilities are, knowing that your cards are going to trigger before them. You can puzzle it out in such a way that you could potentially defeat all the enemies or not. You might end up in some situations where no matter how you puzzle it out, you just can't do enough damage, and that's part of the game too.
And you might be asking yourself, well, how is this balanced in terms of these enemies coming out? What if you're playing with 2 players? What if you're playing with 4? Well, in a combat round, only ever 3 player cards are going to be played. So in a 3-player game, each player plays 1. In a 2-player game, one of the players is going to play 2, and the other player is going to play 1. And in a 4-player game, 3 of the players are going to play cards, but the 4th isn't. And this is where that player order comes in, because this first player token is going to bounce around. There are opportunities in the game where you can choose to do that and choose a new first player. There are many things in the game where you flip a tile and it'll say, move that first player token to the next player. So that's going to give everyone a chance to play in some fights, maybe not every single fight though.
Yeah, and that, again, that's part of the puzzle of the game, because if you have a particular fight where one of the characters was maybe really good at doing a specific status effect, they might not be participating in that specific fight. So maybe if you know you're fighting a boss and one of the characters is really good against that boss, you want to try to manipulate that first player marker. And sometimes you can just get to choose who has it in order to kind of set up the best bet for you. Now, at the start of a run, or at the start of the very first time you fight a battle in the game, it's possible you could die in the first battle.
Yeah.
Doing 4 damage could be really hard. But again, that's where some of these items come into play. That's where some of those mutations come into play. You might start getting mutations that say, at the start of every combat, they all just take a damage automatically, and so now you only have to do 1. Or you might have weapons that say, during the first round, just do an extra damage. And that's kind of how you synergize with your cards in order to defeat some of these tougher enemies.
Yeah, you're going to play this the first time and go, oh, this is rough. But then the moment you start spending some of those cells, you're going to see, just from the moment you see the cards, you're going to go, oh, okay, well, this is going to be a lot easier to get through some of these guys now. And that, I think, based on what we imagine is going to happen throughout the game, is going to get easier and easier, so that later you're going to be able to run through the prisoners' quarters a little easier.
Yeah.
Now, with that said, spoiler alert, there are some cards in here too, as you play and progress and spend cells, that are even going to enhance the prisoners' quarters deck of enemies with what I imagine are stronger enemies.
With better rewards, though, so you're still getting better rewards as you progress through the game. And of course, these biomes are going to get harder and harder. The prisoners' quarters being the easy one, then you have the toxic sewers, and I think there's at least 4 different biomes that we know of.
Yeah, I don't know how many biomes there are. We have 2 biomes in this prototype we have, and then the boss fight, which is one other thing that I wanted to touch on. I don't want to spoil it too much because it probably will be the first boss fight in the game. But the boss fight uses the same combat system for the most part, but kind of ratchets it up a level, because in this boss at least had a deck of cards too, that one of the abilities on their sort of combat rows would be to draw one of those cards. You drew that card and it could do a number of things. It could be straight out attacks, it could be things that the boss would do or maneuvers, but it also might be, in this case, adding some fire to the situation, which was a bad thing for us when we faced off the boss. But the boss encounters, I think, promise to be just a little bit more advanced and unique experiences compared to the rest of the combat that's going on.
Well, and there's also a huge difference between fighting a boss and just fighting these enemies. In that, as long as you can survive this enemy fight, if you can survive the 3 rounds, you're golden. You might not get the treasure or the loot or the bonuses for killing them, but you survive and you get to move on. The boss, you don't get to just survive 3.
It's a battle to the end.
It's a battle to the end. Yeah, either you die or they die. It's going to keep cycling through those 3 rounds over and over again until one side becomes victorious. And spoiler alert, again, just like the video game, you're probably not going to beat any given boss the first time you reach them, because when you get to a new boss, you open up the rules sheet and you go, oh, we are not prepared for this fight.
Right.
But then in the future, you know, okay, well, this boss is weak against this, or this boss does this particular thing, so let's load up on items or whatever that might help us against a particular, strength, or help you build up a particular strength against that boss.
Yeah, like any good rogue-lite or video game in general, this game is going to let you learn as you play over and over and over until you've learned enough to really take on and tackle more and more throughout the game. And a big part of that is losing. When you die, you are going to go to a session where you're going to spend those cells, like we said. You're going to get cards up here that have some impact at the beginning of every run. So the next run, you're going to look at these cards up here. Some of them might give you some things before the run even begins. Then there's cards that might go here. You can see there's one built in to the very first run here that says each player has 1 equipment space. Until we change that card, we can't hold a bunch of equipment. We can hold 1 thing of equipment. But there's going to be something somewhere here that advances that. And then there are some, even, spoiler alert, that advance some of these guys that make them a little better, maybe a little cheaper, maybe give you more flexibility.
Yeah.
But all of these things are meant to sort of enhance your game going forward. Even these runes that you discover, once they're flipped over, you have those runes
Right.
in the game. Unless you want to, I assume there's going to be a mode in the game where you can completely reset
Well,
from scratch.
you can always reset.
You can always reset.
All these decks are renumbered, so you can put everything back in order. You could reset this game, but for me, the appeal of being able to continuously
It's cool.
progress, especially, I don't know what we have no idea what their future plans are
Yeah.
for releasing expansions, but if they can keep releasing content and allow you just to continue, there is a way to beat the game. I mean, there is a final boss that you could eventually reach and fight.
We imagine.
But then even after that, you can still just restart a new run and see if you can do it again, right? You're still playing the game. And I think that's a very cool premise for this game to hold up to.
Yeah, so it's a very interesting take, bringing a video game like Dead Cells to the tabletop. But if you have any more questions, please put them in the comments below. We'll try to get down there and answer whatever we can. Until next time, though, make sure everyone has fun at the table, and we'll see you then.